You order corned beef, salted beef, and in your mind, you might imagine golden corn kernels sprinkled somewhere in the recipe, perhaps as seasoning or marinade. But there is no corn here at all. The truth is this: the word corn in that name was born at a time when corn did not yet exist in Europe. Centuries ago, corn was not a specific plant. It was a morphological term, used to describe anything small, hard, and grain-shaped barley seeds, salt crystals, even grains of sand. Then European colonists arrived in the Americas and encountered a new crop, maize. Because it had kernels, they simply called it corn. In an instant, the ancient meaning of the word was replaced. Only a few old expressions survived: corned beef, peppercorn, barleycorn, linguistic fossils lingering in a modern world. You are not just eating a piece of meat. You are consuming a word that has outlived its original meaning, a fragment of language preserved like salted memory across centuries. In Old English, corn never meant maize alone. It traces back to the Proto-Germanic kernum, meaning grain in general. When early English speakers said corn of sand, they meant a grain of sand. Corn of salt meant a grain of salt. Even the King James Bible, 1611, uses phrases like a corn of wheat, which modern English would translate simply as a grain of wheat. The word once functioned much like the scientific idea of a particle today, both a unit of matter and a geometric concept. A corn could be any small, bounded structure, from crystals to seeds. When early English preservers cured meat with salt, they described the process as to corn the beef to cover it with large grains. Corned beef, therefore, had nothing to do with maize. It was the semantic product of a pre-scientific age, when any small, uniform object might be called a corn. Why did people care so much about grain size? Because in a world without thermometers or precise clocks, geometry served as the only measuring tool. Medieval salt workshops had to ensure crystals were large enough to dissolve slowly, but small enough to penetrate evenly. The ideal size was described as barleycorn, the width of a barley grain. Interestingly, this measure later became the foundation of English length standards. 1 inch equals 3 barleycorns. Standardizing salt grain size was therefore not just a technical choice, it helped shape the entire Anglo-American measurement system. Each grain of salt acted as a micro-model of stability, dissolving at predictable rates and enabling precise food preservation. Even today, metallurgy and materials science rely on the concept of grain size to describe microscopic structures. Steel with finer grains is stronger and more durable. Meat cured with evenly sized salt grains dries more consistently and lasts longer. Thus, the word corn is more than vocabulary. It reflects a technical mindset, one in which the geometry of particles determines the fate of matter. When Christopher Columbus and later European explorers reached the New World, they encountered a plant with large golden kernels growing in rows called maize by indigenous peoples. Europeans saw familiar grain-like shapes and named it according to their own languages: corn, blé d'Inde, grano turco. Within a few centuries, corn no longer meant grain but became the proper name for maize. By the early 19th century, dictionaries had begun replacing the older definitions. This shift reflects a form of linguistic colonialism, where dominant cultures redefined words to describe the new world. Corned beef, however, remained an exception, a semantic relic preserved by commercial branding. Just as the word film persists in the digital age, corned remains tied to salted meat, even though corn now simply means maize. Every time we say corned beef, we unknowingly repeat the vocabulary of the 17th century, a time when the world was understood through shapes rather than biological classification. Curiously, no one has seriously proposed renaming it. No movement insists on calling it salted beef or preserved beef. By then, corned had stopped being a description and had become an industrial label. In technical culture, language sometimes solidifies like cooled metal. Once a term enters production standards, it can outlive its original meaning. Corned beef now describes a sensory experience: flavor, texture, saltiness, dryness, rather than the physical presence of salt grains, like asphalt, which no longer comes from resin, or cassette tape, which survives long after tapes have faded. Corned beef endures through systemic memory. Here, language becomes a technological storage medium, preserving processes, habits, and industrial norms. Every time we say corned, we activate an invisible chain of knowledge: cubic salt crystals, osmotic principles, industrial standardization. A single word can carry centuries of technical evolution if we know how to listen. We often think language is merely a tool for communication, but in truth, it is a data archive of civilization. A word that survives long enough becomes a fossil, preserving entire systems of technology, culture, and emotion. Corned beef, therefore, is more than a dish. It is proof that every concept, every noun in daily life was once a form of technology, a way of seeing the world. And when we bite into that slice of salted meat, we are not only tasting sodium chloride, but also the flavor of language itself crystallized in salt, keeping human memory from dissolving away.